Welcome to another episode of Never Chalked, where it is Never Chalked, presented to you by the greatest ever. I'm your host, PescaroDB, and I'm joined by TG's very own Voltz and Klay. We have lots to talk about as Champs has just ended and Rostermania has officially begun. So stay tuned as we dive right into these topics. Alright, y'all, there's a lot to unpack after Champs 2023. The New York Subliners went and swept the Toronto Ultra. There was a lot of drama with that matchup between Scrap and Kismet. I don't think anyone expected that outcome, at least in the fashion that it happened. But overall, this event was one of the best, I'd say, in the CDL era. But starting with just the Champs matchup, the grand finals specifically, Voltz, I wanted to hear your thoughts on that matchup and whether you think it was just, an off day for Toronto, or was NYSL really just that much better of a team?
Man. So first, it was a little embarrassing for Toronto, right? You looked literally like the team to beat all weekend long, especially the route you had to take leading up to grand finals. You beat Thieves, you beat FaZe, you beat the Subliners.
You 3-0'd them,
yeah. And you're in the finals. You're looking final, right? You just look like you were on top of the world. You're unstoppable. And honestly, that day waking up Sunday morning, I was like, yeah, Ultra's taking this, right? I just had that feeling. I was like, they look great. But going on the other way around, there was some talk that came from Scrap that kind of lit a fire underneath Kismet for one, but I'm sure the whole Subliner squad, they heard it, and that didn't sit well with them, man. So they came out guns a-blazing and just ran through Ultra. And, man, I just tip it to Kismet because he was the one that said he's going to regret it. I'm going to go smoke him, and smoke him he did. And I don't know, man, just props to them. I will say, I do think part of it, at least in a 5-0 fashion, yes, Ultra, they were definitely off. There's no way, you're on and getting ran through like that. If you're at the top of your game, I think they were off. It was an off day. The worst time to have an off day. Absolutely. But the Subliners just came out guns a-blazing, man. They looked incredible. It was definitely one of the most impressive grand finals I have ever seen. What was it? It was literally you had the top 2 KD performances from two of all time, not just
3
CDL.
out of 4.
Yeah, 3 out of top 4.
Hydra is 4th now, and then Kismet's 1 and Skies is 2.
Yeah, so those guys, they just wanted it, man. They wanted it. And so if I had to lean one way, personally, it was just the Subliners were ready, and they wanted it way more than Ultra did.
For sure. And, it also was only the second time in all of competitive COD history where Champs Grand Finals was a sweep. I think the only other time was Complexity doing it against Envy in Ghosts. So it's been that long since the last time it's happened. And obviously a lot has changed in terms of how the league operates and whatnot. Klay, so bouncing it over to you, obviously there's not enough we can say to summarize just how dominant NYSL was. And clearly they were, the best team this year. They won 3 out of 6 events in a game that many people would say was inconsistent in terms of how it played. But in terms of the 8 teams that we had at Champs altogether, who would you say impressed you, and who would you say maybe underperformed the expectations?
Underperformed. I'm
wearing the shirt of a team that underperformed, if that helps.
LAT was definitely the team to underperform. That was very underwhelming seeing them. They won Major 4. Yep. And they just came out at Champs and just absolutely shit the bed. A team that I think performed really, really well was Seattle Surge. They looked really, really dominant. I don't remember who they got put out by. I think it was maybe FaZe.
Yep.
I might be wrong. Okay.
No, you're right.
Okay, well, they played really, really good. Like, I think Mac was having, like, his way with just about any team that they were playing except for FaZe. But they looked really, really good to me. So I don't really got too much to say about them.
Mac looked incredible against Optic.
He looked different. Like, all year, he just underperformed. And then at Champs, he just, like, something lit.
Yeah, well, and so that's actually a good segue because I was and bouncing it back to you, Voltz, I was going to say, moving on from, I guess, teams and looking at specific players, obviously we can say Mac is one of those ones who rose to the occasion of Champs, which, let's be real here, he could have bad performances all year, but if he's performing well at Champs, it's really, all you can ask for. Who else would you say stepped up and performed well for their teams? Even if the team itself didn't have a good run, who do you think individually had some good performances here at Champs?
Man, I'm kind of going back to our last episode, but I have to give it to that boy Snoopy, man. He came out and looked pretty dang good. I mean, he looked pretty good coming out. I mean, yeah, they lost the Optic round 1.
Yep.
But then they ended up getting a win in the losers.
Yep.
And he was a big part of that. Maybe the KD doesn't necessarily reflect it. I'm not a huge person that leans on KD as like the end-all be-all stat on if you're a good player or not. Snoopy just looked good. He looked comfortable, which was very surprising. Like, even in that Optic series, if he's not on if he doesn't have a roster spot next year, I would be very shocked, very shocked. He performed admirably, and if I'm Boston, I'm thinking about building around him specifically. He's one that I think he performed very, very well. And then on the flip side, if I was to say somebody that underperformed, he kind of been doing this almost all year long, but I'm going to have to go Kenny, man. I mean, there was always this talk of Champs Kenny, and he always shows up. And to me, that did not happen at this Champs, man. And that was a huge part on why Thieves went out top 8. So,
yeah, I mean, this was definitely, or arguably, I will say, his worst performance at Champs in his career, even though his average placement, I believe, is like fourth place. So he usually turns out, but LA Thieves, people thought maybe they could become the first team to go back-to-back in terms of winning Champs. They were technically the furthest thing from it of all the teams that made Champs. They were first eliminated. And speaking on the Boston breach, I completely agree with you. I think that Snoopy, he didn't drop like a 1.4 or anything flashy.
Right.
But people need to remember it was his first ever competition in the CDL, online or LAN, and it's at Champs. And first matchup, you go up against Optic. And I hate to say it, Awakening costed them heavily in that match because he was playing for kills, you could tell. And he had a high KD, but wasn't hopping on the hill or doing any of the objective stuff, and that really costed them. But I want to say Snoopy had like a 0.98. I mean, he was right there around a 1, and for a aggressive SMG in this game, I think that's perfectly fine. Again, especially considering it's his first ever event. I think another guy that we could give a lot of props to that most people have been dogging all year and are even saying he's going to be getting released is Slasher. A lot of people, have given him crap because he's the easy scapegoat for FaZe. Abizi and Celium got first team All-Star. Simp didn't have his best year, but he still performed well for the most part. And it was just easiest to target Slasher anytime that Atlanta FaZe had problems. And I want to say he had like the 4th highest KD at this event, like overall or something like that. So huge props to him. I think if we want to transition here now into talking about the upcoming Rostermania, a lot of people are saying that FaZe is a team that's, going to move on from Slasher. They'll keep their core 3 players and add someone else. Starting with Atlanta FaZe, Klay, do you think that it would be wild for them to keep Slasher and just run it back with the same team, or do you definitely think there's a change coming?
I definitely think there's a change coming. I don't think Slasher was their fix. I don't even think he was much of an upgrade from RCDs. Like I was very confused when that happened in the offseason, but I'm sure there was probably like some internal like issues with RCDs or something. But
I think LAG also threw a bag at him.
Yeah,
I think that was also part of it.
I also agree with that. This might be a little bit of a hot take, but I think Dashy goes to Atlanta FaZe. I don't want it to happen because I just don't like Atlanta FaZe, but something's telling me that that's what's going to happen. And he's also really good friends with Cell, so, I mean, anything could happen in this league.
And then on top of that, Dashy has become, on all of Optic Gaming and all their time competing in COD, they love to have that one player that they just blame everything on because everyone else on the roster can do no wrong and they want to blame the one guy. And, for a while, at first it was Nadeshot. Then when you had the Dynasty roster, that changed into Karma. And I feel like ever since he's joined Optic, it's been Dashy. That no matter how well he performs, if the team underperforms, he's instantly the one that they blame. And they already almost moved on from him in the offseason this past year. And then they benched him around, after Major 1 or whatever. So I think it shows that they're not fully sold on keeping him. And I think they would be pretty stupid. I think letting him go to FaZe would be an even bigger mistake than when they let RCDs go to FaZe after MW19. And I think the league would regret it heavily. That team would be freaking nuts. A BZ, Simp, Cellium,
and forget Simp and Abizi. You guys Cell and Dashy on the same team.
Cell and Dashy, exactly. The possibilities there are scary, to say the least. Like I said, I still am in the boat that I don't know if necessarily moving on from Slasher is like a must. Like I don't think they have to, but they could look to upgrade that position. But Voltz, moving into some different rosters, who, even if just, one specific team, who do you think is, like, for sure going to go ahead and make some serious moves this offseason?
Oh, definitely Seattle, man. I think they make some serious changes. Even though they placed 4th, you already know you're losing Pred. And honestly, like, looking at those guys, if you were to build around one, it would be Sib after Pred. So to me, it's like, let's just say you keep Sib, and I think you just do a full reset after that point. It's like, just give some fresh blood for Sib to work with. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Clayster goes over there, maybe Illy goes over there. Just someone else for Sib to team with, and you're not going to necessarily upgrade, at least from that one SMG spot perspective of Pred, but you could probably upgrade over Mac and then maybe your SMGs as a whole, depending on who you bring in. And then, just let Sib be Sib. Sib is really good. I do think he's somebody that you could potentially build around. But that would definitely be one roster that I feel like is going to make some serious changes. Maybe they even change all 4 spots. You never know.
I kind of want.
What were you saying? Sorry, you can go, Klay.
I kind of want to bounce off of that. A roster that I'm hoping that happens with Seattle. I want Sib to stay, but I could also see Klay going over. Well, isn't Sib a flex?
Yeah.
Or is he a main?
Sib's flex. Accuracy's main.
Okay, so I see. So from the oh my God, English, please. The the roster I want to see happen is Klay, Sib, Nero, and maybe a PC. I don't know. That would be
that
crazy.
Would be wild.
But I mean, if anybody's gonna throw a bag, it could be Seattle. They're getting rid of Pred already, or if maybe they keep Pred and bring Nero in. I could see that also happening.
That's what I was actually gonna propose to you guys. Is like, I mean, before champs, I think it was a easy foregone conclusion that Seattle and Pred were gonna split up, and obviously the most talked about team to go and get Pred has been Optic Texas. But when you go and you eliminate that team and you make a run to 4th, like after not having beaten any other team except LAG on LAN since Major 1, and you go and knock out the Thieves, you knock out Optic, and I mean, you lose to FaZe, but like, and I think the other team they lost to was, did they lose?
FaZe. They lost FaZe
only
twice.
Lose to FaZe twice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you literally only lost to FaZe, who had an average placing of like 2nd or 3rd all year. It was the first time we haven't had a BZ and Simp competing in the grand finals at champs since COD World War II. So I don't know. I mean, I think Seattle, it's an interesting thing because I do not see them sticking together entirely. I definitely could see them rolling forward with Pred and Sib and being like, these two are our guys, but we need to build around them. And like, I know that camp and the coach and all that, they're always very, what do you call it? They're always giving praise to guys like Accuracy and Mac, who their work doesn't necessarily show up on the stat sheet, but they have a big impact on the game in other ways, such as being an IGL. But I think an interesting route they could go, and I'll let y'all comment on this after I say it. I think they could keep Pred and Sib, elevate Gwyn, who just won Challengers Champs with Omit, to be the SMG duo with Pred. And then, I mean, that other main AR spot, there's quite a few different routes you could go. Like you guys said, Clayster. I think that would be enticing for him because it's two young players, but they're like kind of they're moving into, I guess, not veterans, but you get my point. They're experienced. They've played 2 full seasons in the league, made top 4 at champs twice in a row now. So, I mean, they know how to have success. And so I could maybe even see a roster. I don't think a lot of people are considering it, but I could see a roster of Clayster, Sib, Gwyn, and Pred. But I wonder if y'all think anything different about that.
Man, so my first thing is if I'm going to be honest, like this Rostermania does seem like the biggest question mark in terms of like what all could happen. We've all had these ideas, but like you said, there's been like, because of the placings at champs, because of the individual performances that we didn't necessarily expect, it does kind of like put a stop to some of those what ifs that were flying around. And there's potentially, like going back to the FaZe thing, it's like, say FaZe stays together. That can create a domino effect, right? Like if there were some people who were interested in Slasher, and it's like, okay, well now we can't get Slasher, so who can we go get? And then you start looking around and it's like, okay, well, because they kept this person, we actually don't want to keep who we have because that was we actually want to keep who we have because that was our upgrade. And so now that we feel like we can't upgrade, we're just going to stand pat, which that could happen. Like, I'm not saying that necessarily that's what's going to happen, but I'm just saying it could do that when like you personally feel like, okay, are we really upgrading? Like, say for example, Pred does stay at Seattle. Imagine what that's going to do to some of these other teams who are truly interested that he's been linked to, like Optic, like Thieves, FaZe, for example. Like that might Pred staying at Seattle might influence FaZe. Like, okay, well, who else could we go for? Is there anyone we really would want? No. Well, then let's just keep Slasher. And, you know, we just got third, and he was turning up there at the end of the year. So it's like, you know, maybe this next game, it's transition right into it and pick right back up to where the FaZe we know and some love and don't love. Get right back to that, right? But I don't know, man. I mean, it's just a big thing. I think like once one thing happens, it will influence how everything else shakes up. Right now is, to me anyways, this is the biggest question mark of Rostermania since I've kept up with the league. Like, you know, I had like a decent idea in past years of like where people would go, or like, oh, you knew this team was going to get rid of this person and yada yada, right? It was there, but right now, man, it's a huge question mark.
Yeah, and I think this is a good last transition here for our last topic. Still dealing with Rostermania, but something I wanted to, and I'll start with you, Klay. Something I wanted to ask. So the rumored or even semi-officially confirmed game for the upcoming CDL season is Modern Warfare 3, developed by Sledgehammer primarily, but all the other developers involved. Assuming that the game runs fairly similar to what we just played on MW2, do you think that might have an impact on teams being maybe more hesitant to make roster moves than they might have been in the past, such as when we transitioned from MW19 to Black Ops Cold War, where it was like two completely different games?
No, because I think teams are going to look at how they individually did, and if it wasn't to their standards, I think they're going to make a change, because if this is a copy and paste of the last game we played, then why would you want to keep the same team if y'all placed poorly, like Thieves? Like, I would be going into this as a Thieves coach, like, I'm not keeping the same team. Yeah, we won a major, but we didn't do anything in champs. We got, top 8? So I'm definitely making a change.
Yeah, and the thing with Thieves, I mean, you know, that's obviously one that everyone's got their eyes on, because all of those players are free agents this offseason. They supposedly, it was rumored that they all took pay cuts to stay together as a team for MW2. And theoretically, or hypothetically, if they were to go and stick together again, at least to start off MW3, I want to say they would be the longest tenured team all playing together, because I don't think we've had a team play more than 2 seasons together on like with the same players. But sending it over to you, Voltz, I mean, obviously Octane, Envoy, even Draza, those are probably guys that a lot of these teams are going to be interested for and bidding for. Kenny, I don't know as much, but still would be a solid option for most teams. Do you think that roster sticks together, or do you think they've had their run, they won 3 events, including champs in 22, and they go ahead and kind of restart and go their separate ways?
Man, that is a tough question. Just first, I want to start with like, Kenny was always known as like the golden boy over there, 100 Thieves, and I don't even would say arguably he was their worst player, like pretty much all year long, over there. And so, if you're 100 Thieves, your golden boy is looking pretty poorly, and if it was just a one-man change, that's where I would think it would come from. I just don't know how that camp is feeling. You know what I mean? And it's like, okay, do we just keep Kenny and hope this is a one-off year, and we'll just build a new, our version of a super team around them? And if that's the case, who? To me, a lot of it is like, I totally understand like the placings and stuff, but you got to think, it's like, you've got to ask yourself the question, with who's available, are you truly upgrading with what you have right now? And
I think there's definitely people that they could upgrade with Kenny.
There's potential, but it's like, again, I'm going back to the golden boy status of where it's like that's just their guy, always has been, and it's like what's the question here? It's like, are you keeping him? And if so, then I could see a world where it's like we're gonna have to let these other guys go and build around him just a different way, or it's, you know, do you want to try and stick it out one more time if you can convince these other guys, like Kenny just had a one-off year, or, which to me this is the best option, like you said, it's get rid of Kenny and you keep the other guys who are just balling out all year long and you try to upgrade. Like, for example, let's say Pred does decide to leave. It's between them and Optic, and let's be real here, 100 Thieves is almost as enticing as going to Optic in terms of like what all they offer over there. So
from a content perspective, players, you're 100% right about that. Because I think that's the other thing that like a lot of people are saying, like why Pred is so keen on joining Optic is that not just as a player, but from a personality perspective and his impact in Call of Duty in general, it would skyrocket with an organization like Optic. But I think you're right. I think LAT, 100 Thieves, they bring that same kind of aspect to the table.
Yeah, I mean, but you got Nate Shot and them doing over there. It's, I mean, so they have some of the biggest content creators in the world over there on 100 Thieves. And, I mean, just imagine a roster with Pred, Envoy, Draza, and Octane. I mean, that's a significant upgrade. At least from this title. And like you said, this is a copy and paste type game, potentially.
That team would be nasty.
It's pretty scary. Not going to lie. Now, I do think, like, Pred and Envoy kind of play the same, and so you would have to work out some dynamics there. But, I mean, it's to me, it's would almost be no different. I do understand like the lore of going to Optic, but man, I mean, 100 Thieves is just as prestigious, you know, in the content realm, and you know they've won champs as well. So you know they're right there.
Let's be real, in the CDL era, and they've had one less year than Optic, or the Optic camp, if you will. But in the CDL era, they've had more success. You know, Cold War was a bad year for them, but Vanguard, they won 3 total events. The last 2, right? Because they won the last 2 of the season and champs, or was it?
No, they won 2 events that year.
Right, because there was only four majors that year. Am I right?
There's 4 majors, and then they had the Pro-Am, and the Pro-Am was won by the subliners that year.
Right. Yeah. But point being, they've won champs and they've won a major, and they won one this year, whereas Optic, I mean, they had their success really when it was MW19 and it was the Huntsman, and things were kind of different that year in the CDL in terms of how events worked. And then they won Major 1 in Vanguard, and who knows what kind of success they would have had for the rest of that season had Illy not gotten hurt. But yeah, I mean, LA Thieves, they know how to win. But I do think that guys like Octane and Envoy, I could see them leaving just because they're going to have a lot of demand, especially Octane, considering he was, I want to say he was second team All-Star this year and just was consistently one of the best ARs in the game. And
I think he was arguably their best player.
He was, I would say he was definitely the best player this year.
It's either him or Jaws, but I don't want to admit that.
And, you know, everyone's talked about his abilities as an IGL have improved a ton over the past, like, year or two. So I could definitely see him being heavily pursued. Draza is I actually, and Klay, I was going to ask you about this, especially since now you just said you didn't want to give him his props, but I was going to ask you this. So Draza it's a very interesting situation. The kid's obviously talented. We can't deny that. He turns up. He plays that flex role, which is valuable. But he has a lot of haters pretty much everyone outside of LAT fans. He plays that villain role similar to like a Scrap. He doesn't handle the like return criticism very well. Scrap at least can admit like, oh yeah, I got shit on. Draza doesn't really take it well. And then on top of that, you had the fans quite literally chanting F you Draza right after they got eliminated by Surge at Champs. Do you think that like that might deter either him from wanting to go to other teams or other teams wanting to bring him in, even though he is a talented player?
I don't think other teams would not want to bring him in because of that, because like you said, he is very talented. I don't know if he would leave though, because I feel like, in my opinion, I see LAT keeping Envoy and Draza. I don't think Octane wants to stay, and if he does, I feel like he's going to be demanding a lot of money. So those are the two that I think are going to stay for sure.
Thank you everybody so much for watching this episode of Never Chalked, presented to you by TGE, the greatest ever. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and leave a comment down below about what your thoughts on Champs are, or a roster you'd like to see heading into next season. Be sure to check the description below for all of our organization's social links, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to keep up with all things TGE. We'll see you next time. Peace out.